The Bofors 40mm gun, often referred to simply as the Bofors gun, is an anti-aircraft/multi-purpose autocannon designed in the 1930s by the Swedish arms manufacturer of Bofors. It was one of the most popular medium-weight anti-aircraft systems during World War II, used by most of the Western Allies as well as by the Axis powers. A small number of these weapons remain in service to this day, and saw action as late as the Gulf War. In the post-war era, the original design was not suitable for action against jet-powered aircraft, so Bofors introduced a new model of significantly more power, the 40mm L/70. In spite of sharing almost nothing with the original design other than the caliber and the distinctive conical flash hider, this weapon is also widely known simply as the Bofors. Although not as popular as the original L/60 model, the L/70 remains in service, especially as a multi-purpose weapon for light armored vehicles, as on the CV-90. Bofors has been part of base systems of since March 2005. Development. The Swedish Navy purchased a number of 2-pounder pom-poms from Vickers as anti-aircraft guns in 1922. The Navy approached Bofors about the development of a more capable replacement. Bofors signed a contract in late 1928. Bofors produced a gun that was a smaller version of a 57mm, 6-pounder, semi-automatic gun developed as an anti-torpedo boat weapon in the late 19th century by Finspång. Their first test gun was a rebarreled Nordenfeldt version of the Finspång gun, to which was added a semi-automatic loading mechanism. Testing of this gun in 1929 demonstrated that a problem existed feeding the weapon in order to maintain a reasonable rate of fire. A mechanism that was strong enough to handle the stresses of moving the large round was too heavy to move quickly enough to fire rapidly. One attempt to solve this problem used zinc shell cases that burned up when fired. This proved to leave heavy zinc deposits in the barrel, and had to be abandoned. In the summer of 1930, experiments were made with a new test gun that did away with controlled feed and instead flicked the spent casing out the rear, whereafter a second mechanism reloaded the gun by throwing a fresh round from the magazine into the open breech. This seemed to be the solution they needed, improving firing rates to an acceptable level, and the work on a prototype commenced soon after. During this period, Krupp purchased a 1/3 share of Bofors. Krupp engineers started the process of updating the Bofors factories to use modern equipment and metallurgy, but the 40mm project was kept secret. The prototype was completed and fired in November 1931, and by the middle of the month it was firing strings of 2 and 3 rounds. Changes to the feed mechanism were all that remained, and by the end of the year it was operating at 130 rounds per minute. Continued development was needed to turn it into a weapon suitable for production, which was completed in October 1933. Since acceptance trials had been passed the year before, this became known as the 40mm Aken M/32. Most forces referred to it as the Bofors 40mm L/60, although the barrel was actually 56.25 calibers in length, not the 60 calibers that the name implies. The gun fired a 900G, 2.0 pounds, high explosive 40 x 311R, rimmed, shell at 2,960 feet/s, 900 m/s. The rate of fire was normally about 120 rounds per minute, 2.0 rounds per second, which improved slightly when the barrels were closer to the horizontal as gravity assisted the feeding from the top-mounted magazine. In practice, firing rates were closer to 80 to 100 rpm, 1.3 to 1.7 rounds per second, as the rounds were fed into the breech from 4-round clips which had to be replaced by hand. The maximum attainable ceiling was 7,200 meters, 23,600 feet, but the practical maximum was about 3,800 meters, 12,500 feet. The gun was provided with an advanced sighting system. The trainer and layer were both provided with reflector sights for aiming, while a third crew member standing behind them adjusted for lead using a simple mechanical computer. Power for the sights was supplied from a 6V battery. In spite of the successful development, the Swedish Navy changed its mind and decided it needed a smaller hand-swung weapon of 13 mm 25 mm size, and tested various designs from foreign suppliers. With the 40 mm well along in development, Bofors offered a 25 mm version in 1932, which was eventually selected as the Bofors 25 mm M/32. The first version of the 40 mm the Navy ordered was intended for use on submarines, where the larger caliber allowed the gun to be used for both and against smaller ships. The barrel was shorter at 42 calibers long, with the effect of reducing the muzzle velocity to about 700 m/s, 2,300 feet/s. When not in use, the gun was pointed directly up and retracted into a watertight cylinder. The only known submarines that used this arrangement was the Shalajone-class boats. The guns were later removed as the subs were modified with streamlined conning towers. The first order for the real L/60 was made by the Dutch Navy, who ordered 5 twin-gun mounts for the cruiser De Ruyter in August 1934. These guns were stabilized using the Hayes-Meyer mount, in which one set of layers aimed the gun, while a second manually stabilized the platform the gun sat on. All 5 mounts were operated by one fire control system. Bofors also developed a towable carriage which they displayed in April 1935 at a show in Belgium. This mount allowed the gun to be fired from the carriage with no setup required, although with limited accuracy. If time was available for setup, the gunners used the tow bar and muzzle lock as levers, raising the wheels off the ground and thereby lowering the gun onto supporting pads. 2 additional legs folded out to the sides, and the platform was then leveled with hand cranks. The entire setup process could be completed in under a minute. Orders for the land-based versions were immediate, starting with an order for 8 weapons from Belgium in August 1935, and followed by a flood of orders from other forces including Poland, Norway, and Finland. It was accepted into the Swedish Army the next year, known as the 40 mm Slovakian M/36, the lowercase m indicating an Army model as opposed to the capital M for Navy. Because of the labor shortages, some of the Bofors 40 mm factories were opened in Poland. The Swedish Navy adopted the weapon as the M/36 in handwork single air-cooled, and power-operated twin water-cooled version. A twin air-cooled mounting, probably hand-worked, was also used by the navies of Sweden and Argentina, and a twin air-cooled wet mounting was developed for Polish submarines. British versions. Army and RAF Regiment versions. The British Army had first examined the weapon when they received a number of Polish-built examples in 1937 for testing, known as the QF 40 mm Mark I, QF standing for quick firing, or Mark I/2 after a minor change to the flash hider. A license was acquired and the gun was converted from metric to imperial measurements. They also made numerous changes to the design to make it more suitable for mass production, as the original Bofors design was intended to be hand-assembled, and many parts were labeled file to fit on assembly, requiring many man-hours of work to complete. Testing showed that aiming the guns against high-speed aircraft was a serious problem. Although the gun could be trained quickly, aiming accurately while doing so proved difficult. In order to address this, the British introduced a complex mechanical analog computer, the Kerosene Director, which drove the laying electrically. A 3-man team operated the director simply by pointing it at the target whilst dialing in estimates for speed, range, and various atmospheric conditions. The director then aimed the guns directly through powered mounts, as the gunners loaded the clips. This eliminated the need for the lead-correcting reflector sights, which were replaced with a backup system consisting of a simple ring and post sight known as a pancake. In this form, the QF 40 mm Mark III, Mk2 was a designation used for a Vickers pom-pom, became the Army's standard light anti-aircraft weapon, operating alongside their 3-inch and 3.7-inch heavy weapons. The gun was considered so important to the defense of Britain after the fall of France in 1940 that a movie, The Gun, was produced to encourage machinists to work harder and complete more of them. British production started slowly. By September 1939 only 233 equipments had been produced, but by the end of the war total production from British, Canadian and Australian factories was over 19,000. Peak production year was 1942 when British factories produced 5,025 and Canadian factories produced 1,311. In combat it was found that the kerosene was difficult to set up to use in many situations, as well as making logistics more complex due to the need to keep its electrical generator supplied with fuel. In most engagements only the pancake sights were used, without any form of correction, making the British versions less capable than those used by other forces. Eventually an anti-aircraft gunnery school on the range at Stifkey on the Norfolk coast delivered a workable solution, a trapeze-like arrangement that moved the pancake sights to offer lead correction, operated by a new crew member standing behind the left-hand layer. The Stifka sight was sent out to units in 1943, arriving in Canadian units in the midst of the Battle of the Aleutian Islands. A final wartime change to the elevation mechanism resulted in the QF 40mm Mark 12. They also designed a much lighter two-wheeled carriage for airborne use. The Army also experimented with various self-propelled anti-aircraft systems based on various tank chassis. Changes to the breech for this role created the QF 40mm Mark 6, which was used on the Crusader to produce the Crusader 3A Mark I. The main self-propelled version of the Bofors used the gun set on the chassis of a Morris commercial four-wheel drive lorry. This was known as the Carrier, SP, 4x4 40mm, AA, Bofors, 30 CWT. Such guns were used in support of Army divisions to provide swift protection against air attack without the need to unlimber. They saw service in Northwest Europe, where 6 SP Bofors of 92nd, Loyals, Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment, Royal Artillery, landed with the British 3rd Infantry Division on Sword Beach on D-Day to protect the vital bridges over the Caen Canal and Orne River, Pegasus Bridge and Horsa Bridge, shooting down 17 German planes. Later in the campaign, SP Bofors were used extensively for ground shoots as well as in an anti-aircraft role. In British Army service the Bofors found a highly specialized role. During the North Africa campaign at the Second Battle of El Alamein, they were used to fire tracer horizontally to mark safe paths for units through the German minefields. This practice was further developed during operations in Northwest Europe, where bursts of color-coded tracer were used to define the axis of advance of the different formations in large-scale night attacks. The formation of the RAF Regiment in February 1942, in response to the Army's failure to defend airfields on Crete, which resulted in strategic defeat on the island to numerically inferior German forces, signaled the transfer of responsibility for defending airfields to the RAF from the Army. This included low-level air defense, and the Bofors L-60 to the same design as the Army version was the principal weapon for the RAF regiment's light anti-aircraft squadrons in North Africa, Malta, Italy, the Balkans, the UK, including the allocation of 52 squadrons to Operation Diver, and Northwestern Europe, from D-Day through to the cessation of hostilities. Number 2875 Squadron RAF Regiment, employing the L-60, became the first unit to shoot down a jet aircraft, a Me-262, with ground-based anti-aircraft fire, at Helmond in the Netherlands on November 28, 1944. Although the Allied air forces had achieved air superiority after D-Day, forward airfields continued to be high-priority targets for the Luftwaffe when the opportunity presented, and this ensured that the RAF regiment's L-60s continued to be heavily used. For example, during the Ardennes offensive, RAF regiment light anti-aircraft squadrons shot down 43 German aircraft and damaged 28 others during attacks on 11 RAF forward airfields on New Year's Day 1945. After World War II, the RAF regiment continued to employ the L-60 as its principal anti-aircraft weapon until it was replaced by the L-70 gun in 1957. The guns were deployed in the UK, Germany, Cyprus, the Middle East, and the Far East. There had been insufficient L-60s available to equip the RAF regiment's squadrons in the Far East during the war, these having to make do mostly with Hispano and Ehrlichen guns. Naval versions. The Royal Navy also made extensive use of the Bofors. Their first examples were air-cooled versions quickly adapted to ships during the withdrawal from Norway. With the fall of the West in 1940, the Dutch minelayer Willem van der Zaan brought them their first example of a water-cooled gun on their Hayes-Meyer triaxially stabilized mounting. Locally produced examples started arriving in 1942, known as the QF 40mm Mark IV for use in twin mounts, or the QF 40mm Mark V for single mounts. The Navy ran through a variety of versions of the basic Bofors gun over the war, including the Mark VII to Mark XI. The Royal Navy's homegrown light anti-aircraft weapon, the QF 2-pounder gun, also had a caliber of 40mm, but was referred to as the QF 2PDR. The designation of models in Royal Navy service is confused as the gun and its mounting received separate mark numbers. The following mountings were used. Mark I, twin mounting based on American design and using American-built guns, not widely fitted. Fitted for remote fire control. Mark II, quadruple version similar to Mark I. Mark III, a navalized version of the Army single mounting, hand-worked elevation and training. Mark IV, a triaxially stabilized twin mounting copied from, and usually known as, the Hayes-Meyer. It had on-mounting fire control, and was usually fitted with radar type 282 to provide target range information. Mark V, twin mounting, that superseded and eventually replaced the Mark IV, often referred to as the utility mounting. This was a simplified, unstabilised mounting based on the American twin mounting Mark I, and was designed for remote fire control. Mark VI, a 6-barreled weapon feeding from large trays instead of clips and designed for remote control from a dedicated radar-equipped director. Mark VII, a single-barreled, hydraulically powered mounting that superseded the Mark III and entered service in 1945. Mark IX, Mark VII mount modified to electrical power, as the mounting Mark IX, and in this form saw service in the Falklands War. The mounting Mark V, Mark VC for Canadian-built examples, for the 20mm Ehrlichen and QF 2-pounder guns was also adopted initially as an interim mount for the Bofors. It was a single-barreled mounting with hydraulic power, and was known as the Boffin. The final British Bofors mounting that saw service was the Stag, stabilized Tachi metric anti-aircraft gun, which was twin-barreled, stabilized, and carried its own Tachi metric, i.e. predictive, fire control system, based around the centimeter radar type 262, capable of locking onto a target. This mounting was heavy, 17.5 tons, and the high vibration environment of the gun mounting was poor location for sensitive valve electronics and mechanical computers. Stag Mark I carried the radar dish over the gun barrels where it was subject to damage during firing, therefore Stag Mark II shifted the set to the roof of the control cabin. Stag was ultimately too difficult to maintain in the harsh environment of a warship and was later replaced by the mounting Mark V with the fire control equipment located remotely, the single Mark VII and ultimately, with the Seacat missile. The final version of Stag was fitted to the RN Type 12 Whitby A/S frigates and the Type 4160 1st Stiesel frigates completed 1956 to 1958. HMNZS Royalist was also fitted with Stag Mk2 during modernization, completed in 1956. Initially it had 3 Stag CIWS, the Stag in Q position was removed in 1960, but it carried 2 mounts until the end of its service in Southeast Asian waters, in 1965. The crew of Royalist appeared to find the Stag a reasonably effective and impressive anti-aircraft weapon during Operation Musketeer in 1956, off Egypt. U.S. versions. Manufacturing. In order to supply both the U.S. Army and U.S. Navy with much greater numbers of the guns, Chrysler built 60,000 of the guns and 120,000 barrels through the war, at half the original projected cost, and filling the Army's needs by 1943. Over the lifetime of the production, their engineers introduced numerous additional changes to improve mass production, eventually reducing the overall time needed to build a gun by half, most of these changes were in production methods rather than the design of the gun itself. Yorksafe and Locke also produced the weapons, though its attempts to coordinate drawings across the program were unsuccessful, and this responsibility was transferred to the Naval Gun Factory in July 1943. There were many difficulties in producing the guns within the United States, beyond their complexity, illustrated by the use of 2,000 subcontractors in 330 cities and 12 Chrysler factories to make and assemble the parts. The drawings were metric, in Swedish, and read from the first angle of projection. Chrysler had to translate to English, fix absolute dimensions, and switch to the third angle of projection. Chrysler engineers also tried to simplify the gun, unsuccessfully, and to take high-speed movies to find possible improvements, but this was not possible until near the end of the war. Naval. The United States Navy's Bureau of Ordnance purchased a twin-mount air-cooled example, spare parts, and 3,000 rounds of ammunition directly from Bofors, which arrived in New York on August 28, 1940 aboard the Army transport USAT American Legion, which had evacuated 897 people, including members of the Norwegian royal family, through the Finnish port of Petsamo. During that month another Dutch ship, the Van Kinsbergen, demonstrated the Hayes-Meyer mount to Navy observers. The gun was quickly chosen as the Navy's standard anti-aircraft weapon over the British 40mm caliber, 2-pounder pom-pom. However, negotiations with Bofors for licensed production stalled when the Swedes requested airplane export and manufacturing licenses in return. Reportedly, the Navy secretly imported a set of imperial designs from Britain and started production illegally. A formal contract with Bofors was reached in June 1941. The resulting Mark I and Mark II weapons were intended for the left and right side of a twin mount, respectively, and were adapted by Chrysler for water cooling. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the existing 1.1, 28mm, quad mount and .50 caliber machine guns were determined to be inadequate against modern aircraft, and their replacement by 40mm Bofors and 20mm Ehrlichen weapons was accelerated. The water-cooled version was used almost exclusively by the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard. The 40mm quadruple mount was developed by essentially mounting two twin mounts side by side. A major improvement was the addition of power operation to both twin and quadruple mounts. Essentially all U.S. naval mountings were twin or quadruple. 40mm weapons were eventually mounted on virtually every naval and armed auxiliary vessel larger than a small landing craft. After the war, the 3/50 caliber gun Mark 27 twin mount began to replace the Bofors, because the VT proximity fuse would not fit a 40mm projectile, and the 40mm weapon was considered inadequate against the emerging anti-ship missile threat. The twin 3 mount was intended to be the same weight as the 40mm quad mount, but was somewhat heavier in practice, which had to be compensated for. Except on destroyers and new construction, the Navy was slow in phasing out the 40mm gun, and it continued in active Navy service through the Korean War. It remained on inactive reserve fleet ships at least through the early 1970s. The Navy's satisfaction with the weapons was demonstrated by their practice of telegraphing Chrysler Corporation with the serial numbers of guns when they shot down an aircraft. Army. In 1938 the United States Army introduced a 37mm gun of their own design, but found it to be of limited performance. In early World War II, 6 British Bofors were imported for testing, along with kerosene predictor directors, and they proved to be superior in all areas. By the middle part of the war, most of the 37mm guns had been replaced by the 40mm. In U.S. Army and Marine Corps service, the single-mount Bofors was known as the 40mm automatic gun M1. The U.S. version of the gun fired 3 variants of the British Mk2 high-explosive shell as well as the M81A1 armor-piercing round, which was capable of penetrating some 50mm of homogeneous armor plate at a range of 500 yards. In the Army, each anti-aircraft artillery, AAA, Auto Weapons Battalion was authorized a total of 32 40mm guns in its 4 firing batteries. Each U.S. Marine Division had a Special Weapons Battalion that included 16 40mm guns. In early 1944 these were replaced with anti-aircraft battalions with 12 40mm guns. Marine Defense Battalions also used the 40mm gun. All of these unit types also included other AA weapons. During World War II, the twin-mount version of the gun was mounted on an M24 Chaffee tank chassis as the M19 gun motor carriage. In the 1950s, the M41 Walker Bulldog tank was heavily modified into the M42 Duster with the same twin 40mm mounting. After being largely withdrawn from service in the early 1960s, the M42 was reintroduced beginning in 1966 for the Vietnam War, where it was mostly used for ground fire support. Following the withdrawal from Vietnam in the early 1970s, the M42 was retained in National Guard service until finally retired in 1988. Air Force. Captured examples. In World War II Germany, the Wehrmacht used a number of Bofors guns which had been captured in Poland and France. The Kriegsmarine also operated some guns obtained from Norway. In German naval use, the gun was designated the 4 cm Flak 28, and was used aboard the cruisers Admiral Hipper and Prinz Eugen toward the end of the war. Beginning in 1942, several E-boats were equipped with the Flak 28 to enable them to fight against British MGBs and MTBs on equal terms. Japan captured a number of Bofors guns in Singapore and put them into production as the Type 5. Both Japan and West Germany continued to use the Bofors gun throughout the Cold War. The Federal German Navy used it in destroyers, frigates, and fast patrol boats until 1984, and in minesweepers to the present day. Variants. 40mm L/60. Although the L/60 was later replaced in production by the L/70, it remained in front-line service well into the 1980s. In most cases, these were the ground anti-aircraft versions, as a suitable replacement in this role did not come along until the introduction of truly effective MANPADS missiles in the 1980s. In United States Army service, the M19 gun motor carriage was replaced by the M42 Duster, using the same turret but based on the chassis of the M41 Walker Bulldog tank. The L/60 saw active service with the Argentinian and British navies in the 1982 Falklands War and continued to be used into the 1990s, when it was replaced by modern 20mm and 30mm artillery. The Canadian forces also used Bofors on their surface fleet, but removed the guns in the late 1980s when they were considered to be outdated. Bofors continue to be the main armament of the Kingston-class coastal defense vessel, although the Navy is in the midst of a search for a suitable replacement. As of August 2006, the French Navy uses L/60s on more than 20 ships, patrols and auxiliaries. Ships of the Norwegian and Icelandic Coast Guards continue to use the 40mm Bofors gun. The L/60 continued in use in the Irish Army until recent years, when it was retired in favor of the radar-controlled L/70. The Irish Naval Service P-20 class retained L/60s on board as their main weapon until the 1990s but were rearmed with L/70s. The last remaining P-20 class patrol vessel, LE Aisling, due for decommissioning in 2016, is now the only vessel fitted with the L/70. 2 retired L/60s can be seen adjacent the square in Sarsfield Barracks, Limerick. The last 40mm/60 Bofors in service with the Royal Australian Navy, RAN, were used as the main weapon aboard the Attack class and Fremantle-class patrol boats and for training purposes at the West Head Gunnery Range at HMAS Cerberus. These were removed from service during 2007. Bofors were used aboard almost every RAN ship to operate between the 1940s and the 1990s, including the aircraft carriers Sydney and Melbourne. As of 2012, the L/60 is still in use by the military of Brazil, Indonesia, Paraguay, and Taiwan. 40mm L/70. By the end of World War II, jet aircraft had so increased the speed of attack that the Bofors simply could not get enough rounds into the air to counter the aircraft before it had already flown out of range. In order to effectively engage these threats, the gun would have to have longer range and a higher rate of fire, thereby increasing the number of rounds fired over the period of an engagement. Bofors considered either updating the 40mm, or alternately making a much more powerful 57mm design. In the end they did both. The new 40mm design used a larger 40x364R round firing a slightly lighter 870G shell at a much higher 1030m/s, 3379 fps, muzzle velocity. The rate of fire was increased to 240 rounds per minute, 4.0 rounds per second, similar to the German Flak 43. Additionally, the carriage was modified to be power-laid, the power being supplied by a generator placed on the front of the carriage. The first version was produced in 1947, accepted in 1948 as the 40mm Slovakian M/48, and entered Swedish service in 1951. Additional changes over the years have improved the firing rate, first to 300 rpm, 5.0 rounds per second, and later to 330 rpm, 5.5 rps. Foreign sales started, as they had in the past, with the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. In November 1953 it was accepted as the NATO standard anti-aircraft gun, and was soon produced in the thousands. The L/70 was also used as the basis for a number of SPAAGs, including the US Army's failed M247 Sergeant York. The UK's RAF Regiment adopted the L/70 to replace its L/60 guns in 1957, retiring its last examples in 1977 and replacing them with the Rapier system. In 1970s Zastava Arms acquired from Bofors license to produce L/70 version together with Laser Computer Group. Ammunition 40mm for L/70 is locally produced for domestic use and export in Sloboda Kakak. In 1979 the Royal Netherlands Air Force acquired 25K L/MSS 6720 Flycatcher radar system and upgraded 75 of their 40 L/70s to create 25 firing units for static air-based defense. The improved guns had an increased rate of fire, 300 rounds/min, and the loading mechanism was provided with extended guides so that it could hold 22 cartridges. A 220V diesel generator was mounted onto the undercarriage. This generator was powered by a Volkswagen diesel engine. In 1989 the Royal Netherlands Army acquired 30 Flycatcher systems. Each Flycatcher was fielded with two modified Bofors 40 L/70G guns. The G stands for gemodificeerd, which is the Dutch word meaning modified. In the 40 L/70G version the loading mechanism was further improved and could be recognized by open rear guides. The 40 L/70G guns were also provided with muzzle velocity radars. Early in the 1990s the Royal Netherlands Air Force 40 L/70s were upgraded to the G version. In the Swedish Army Combat Vehicle 90 there is a cartridge-fed, automatic version of the L/70 gun installed. In order to fit inside the vehicle, the gun is mounted upside down. New armor-piercing and programmable ammunition have also been developed. Germany has used L/70 guns on its Class 352, Class 333 and Class 332 mine-hunting vessels, although these will be replaced by Rheinmetall MLG-27 remote-controlled gun systems until 2008. Until the early 80s L/70 guns guided by D-7B radars were in widespread use in the anti-aircraft role in the German Navy and German Air Force until replaced by Roland SAMs. Dardo. Breda, now Otto Mellera, of Italy uses Bofors 40mm L/70 gun in its anti-aircraft weapons systems Type 64, Type 106, Type 107, Type 564 and Type 520. Also they have developed a CIWS system named Dardo for the Italian Army and Navy. A newer development from Breda, the Fast 40, essentially a Dardo gun mount with twin 40mm/L70 guns, has nearly doubled the rate of fire to 450 rpm, 7.5 rounds per second, 2 times 450 in twin mount, normally equipped with a 736 round magazine and a dual feed mechanism for naval use. Gunships. Since the beginning of the 1970s, Bofors L/60s have been used in the United States Air Force's AC-130 gunships in the air-to-ground role. There were plans to remove these and the M61 Vulcans from newer AC-130U variants and replace them with 30mm autocannons. However, these plans did not come to fruition, and the Bofors and Vulcans are still in service. When 4 additional AC-130Us were to be converted from 2002, the necessary 40mm L/60 guns had to be salvaged from old M42 targets at the Nellis AFB range. Users: Algeria, Argentina, Australia, Austria, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Belgium, Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.